Thomas had always been a skeptic. Growing up in a small town with a myriad of local legends, he dismissed every ghost story, haunted house, and supernatural event as mere folklore. He was a man of science, a firm believer in logic and reason. That is, until he moved into the old family manor. The manor had stood on the outskirts of town for over a century, a brooding structure with ivy-covered walls and creaking floorboards. It had been in his family for generations, but it had stood empty since his great-grandfather's mysterious disappearance. Thomas, inheriting the property, saw it as a challenge project to restore and a chance to prove once and for all that there was no such thing as ghosts. On his first night in the manor, as Thomas was unpacking in the dimly lit living room, he heard a faint whisper. He dismissed it as the wind. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. Leave this place. Thomas laughed it off. Old houses make noises, he muttered to himself. He continued unpacking, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Every shadow seemed to stretch towards him, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo his steps. That night, Thomas had a dream. He was walking down a long, dark hallway lined with portraits of his ancestors. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. At the end of the hallway stood a door. As he reached for the handle, a cold hand grasped his wrist, and he woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The next day, Thomas decided to explore the manor further. In the dusty attic, he found a journal belonging to his great-grandfather, Jonathan. The entries detailed strange occurrences, whispers in the night, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The last entry was particularly chilling. I fear I am not alone in this house. There is a presence, a darkness that seeks to consume me. If I do not survive, let this be a warning to those who come after me. Leave this place. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine, but quickly shook it off. It's just an old journal, he told himself. Nothing more. However, that night, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent. Leave now, or face the same fate. Thomas tried to ignore it, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the door from his dream and felt the cold hand on his wrist. Days turned into weeks, and though mass skepticism began to waver, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. He started to see glimpses of a figure in the corners of his vision, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes. The final straw came when he found a message scrawled on the mirror in his bathroom: "You are not welcome." Terrified, Thomas decided to leave. He packed his bags in a hurry, but as he reached the front door, it slammed shut on its own. Panic set in as he struggled to open it, but it was as if an unseen force held it shut. The whispers grew to a deafening roar, and the gaunt figure appeared before him, its hollow eyes boring into his soul. "Leave this place," it hissed, "or join me in the darkness." With a surge of adrenaline, Thomas forced the door open and fled the manor. He never looked back, abandoning the property and the town. To this day, the manor stands empty, a silent sentinel to the horrors within. And Thomas? He never spoke of what happened that night, but the fear in his eyes told the story. Thomas had always been a skeptic, but in the end, the manor had proven him wrong. Years passed, and the manor remained untouched, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching over the landscape. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning children to stay away. The few who dared to approach it swore they heard whispers and saw fleeting shadows. The legend of the haunted manor grew, becoming a tale of terror passed down through generations. Thomas tried to move on with his life, but the memories of that night haunted him. He moved to a bustling city, hoping the noise and activity would drown out the whispers in his mind. He threw himself into his work, trying to bury the fear that lingered just beneath the surface. Yet, every night, as he lay in his modern, brightly lit apartment, he felt the cold hand of the past reaching out to him. One evening, as Thomas was walking home from work, he noticed a man standing across the street, staring at him. The figure was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed all too familiar. Thomas' heart raced. He blinked, and the man was gone. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, but the encounter left him shaken. The sightings became more frequent. Thomas would catch glimpses of the gaunt figure in crowded places: at the grocery store, on the subway, even outside his office window. He began to isolate himself, fearing he was losing his mind. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder each night you cannot escape. Desperate for answers, Thomas returned to his childhood town. He needed to confront the past, to find some way to break free from the haunting. The manor loomed in the distance as he drove up the familiar road, its dark silhouette sending chills down his spine. He approached the front door, feeling a mix of dread and determination. As he stepped inside, the air grew thick with an oppressive silence. Dust-covered furniture and cobwebs greeted him, remnants of a life long abandoned. He made his way to the attic, where he had found his great-grandfather's journal. The journal was still there, untouched. Thomas turned to the last entry, hoping to find some clue he had missed before. Underneath the final words, faint and almost illegible, were additional scribbles. The answer lies beneath. With renewed purpose, he descended to the basement, a place he had avoided during his initial stay. The basement was cold and damp, filled with the scent of mold and decay. Thomas searched the walls and floor, looking for any sign of a hidden compartment. Finally, in a dark corner, he found a loose stone. With trembling hands, he pried it away, revealing a small, dusty box. Inside the box was an old locket and a letter. The letter, written in his great-grandfather's hand, detailed a pact made with a dark entity in exchange for prosperity. The locket was the key to breaking the curse, but it required a sacrificia willing soul to take the place of the entity bound to the manor. Thomas realized what he had to do. He could not allow this curse to continue tormenting his family or anyone else. With a heavy heart, he took the locket and whispered a prayer. The gaunt figure appeared before him, eyes hollow and pleading. "I will take your place," Thomas said, his voice steady. The figure nodded, and Thomas felt a cold embrace envelop him. Darkness consumed him, and the manor grew silent once more. The town soon noticed the change. The whispers ceased, and the shadows vanished. The manor, once a place of fear, now stood as a solemn reminder of the sacrifices made. Thomas was never seen again, but his courage and selflessness ensured that the darkness would no longer claim another victim. And so, the legend of Thomas End became not just a tale of horror, but one of redemption and bravery, whispered among the townsfolk for generations to come.